The internet. Wow.
Yeah.
It's an absolute flood of information, isn't it?
Oh, completely. A constant stream, updates, opinions, analysis. It's incredible.
So much stuff out there. But it really makes you wonder, like, in this huge digital ocean, how do you even find solid ground? How do you figure out who's actually offering genuine insight versus, who's just adding noise or maybe even trying to mislead you?
Yeah, and that challenge, it gets magnified in places where online platforms have, super quickly become the main way people get news and commentary.
Right.
Often bypassing or just moving way faster than traditional media or even the regulators.
Exactly. And that's the whole landscape we're diving into today. Specifically looking at Nepal, we've got this really interesting collection of sources.
Yeah. What do we got?
Everything from a pretty lively Reddit thread, just regular users talking, to proper news articles, doing deep dives, and even official documents, like regulatory codes.
Okay, so a real mix.
A really diverse stack, yeah. It gives us lots of different angles on this thing.
That's good. It means we can look at it from the audience side, people trying to make sense of what they're seeing, from journalists investigating, the whole misinformation problem, and then from the official bodies trying to set some standards, bring some accountability, multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to go deep into these sources, to unpack them properly and pull out the most important bits, the key takeaways that can help you navigate this space better.
Okay.
We want to help you understand what's going on with online commentary in Nepal, especially on places like YouTube. Explore these, frankly, big issues of bias and misinformation that keep popping up. Look at how different groups are trying to tackle it, and ultimately just give you a clear picture so you can think more critically about all the stuff flooding your feed.
Sounds good. So sifting through user chats, news reports, official rules, the whole shebang.
Exactly. The full picture.
Okay, so maybe let's start by setting the scene a bit. How did we get here? I mean, these platforms like YouTube, they've completely changed the game, haven't they?
Totally. Suddenly, pretty much anyone with a camera and internet can be a commentator.
Yeah.
Sharing their thoughts on, everything. Current events, history, politics, social stuff, reaching huge audiences that used to be only for, big media houses.
It's incredibly powerful, that shift. But it creates this new dynamic, doesn't it? So many voices, and lots of them are operating outside those traditional journalism structures.
Right. So how do you know who's reliable? Where's the line between someone's opinion and, actual verifiable fact?
It's the million-dollar question.
And it's exactly the question that kicks off our journey through the sources, starting with that Reddit thread you mentioned.
Oh, yes, the Reddit thread. That takes us straight to the audience perspective. Right?
Yeah.
The people actually watching all this content.
Yeah. And the core question the original poster asks is so direct, so relatable. They basically just ask, who do you think are more biased and who are not among Nepali YouTube commentators?
Simple as that. It shows this isn't just academic, right?
Yeah.
It's a real active concern for users. They're trying to filter this stuff.
Totally. And the community just jumps right in, naming names based on what they've watched.
Oh, yeah. Who comes up?
We see channels like the Nepali Comment, In-Depth Story, Project Kura, Kedanush, Nishal Rawat, Subhash Karki, Anand Nepal. It's like a snapshot of who's making waves.
Okay. So a few key players people are talking about.
But what's really interesting isn't just the names, it's the reasons people give, why they think someone is biased or why they think someone isn't.
Ah, okay. So what kind of criteria are people using, consciously or not?
Right. So take the Nepali Comment. Someone praises him, calls him unbiased, informative, and at the same time entertaining. Pretty standard praise, right? But then they add this crucial little detail. He actually reads.
Actually reads. Okay. That sounds simple, but it's significant.
Exactly. It implies the user really values a commentator who, does their homework, bases their stuff on research, engages with what's already out there instead of just riffing.
Right. Contrasting that with, say, the criticisms.
Yeah, so someone like Nishal Rawat gets described using terms like ajab-ani biased,
Which means?
sort of strange and biased. And the user elaborates, saying he feels inconsistent and seems like he's trying to gumai controversy stir garna kocha.
Okay, what's that imply?
It means trying to stir up controversy in a roundabout way, maybe manipulatively.
Yeah.
So the feeling is he's not engaging honestly, he's just trying to generate drama.
Got it. So less about substance, more about stirring the pot.
Exactly. And then you see clear perceptions of political bias. Channels like Anand Nepal and In-Depth Story are called very biased.
And specifically why?
Specifically because they like to praise kings and hate towards Lok Tantra. meaning they seem to favor the old monarchy and are against the current democratic system.
Okay, so that's a very clear political stance people are picking up on in the content.
Right. But the threat isn't just like people listing opinions. It also throws in this really important counter perspective. It forces you to think harder about bias itself.
How so?
Well, one user challenges the whole idea of finding unbiased commentators. They asked, basically, is judging bias just about whether you happen to agree with the content?
Oh, good question. That makes you look inward a bit.
Totally. It prompts you to think about your own biases as a consumer. Are we just quick to label something biased because it doesn't fit our worldview?
That's a really crucial self-check, isn't it? It's so easy to spot bias elsewhere, much harder to see how our own views color things.
And adding another layer, another user talks about their approach. And they say they're not really looking for unbiased people, but trying to engage in like constructive critique of any belief or ideology.
Okay, so focusing more on the how than the what.
Yeah, they look for fairness in how a topic is handled.
Right.
They notice when something gets, quote, excessive negativity or attention that seems way out of proportion to what's actually warranted.
Interesting. That sounds like a pretty sophisticated way to engage, looking beyond just agreeing or disagreeing to assess the method, the proportionality.
Right. It's quite nuanced. Okay, so this whole conversation about bias and how people filter it leads us to maybe the most foundational point from this Reddit thread.
Which is?
The user Harry Mahari just cuts through it all and says, well, everyone is biased.
Huh. Simple, but probably true.
Profoundly true, right? Total objectivity. It's incredibly hard, maybe impossible for humans, especially when you're talking complex social, political stuff.
Yeah, fair point. But they don't just leave it there, do they?
No, exactly. Harry Mahari then identifies what they see as the critical difference. It's not necessarily about if bias exists, but about the approach to making the content.
Okay. What's the distinction they make?
They contrast someone like the Nepali comment with in-depth story. They argue the difference is fundamental. One actually reads, like we mentioned, and bases their work, maybe, on credible journalism writing, like citing a Nepali Times article, even lifting from it.
Okay, grounded in other sources. And the other?
The other, as Harry Mahari puts it very bluntly, just make shit up, completely unmoored from reality. It's all empty calories.
Wow. Okay. That's a stark contrast.
It really is. And that distinction feels absolutely crucial. It shifts the focus away from this often fuzzy, subjective debate about bias towards something much clearer, something you can actually check.
Right. Is the content grounded in facts? Is it based on credible sources?
Or is it just invention, speculation, stuff made up and passed off as truth?
That's a much more useful way to evaluate online commentary, isn't it? Rather than just, do I agree with this person? It's about the basic integrity of the information.
Exactly. That makes so much sense. The real issue isn't always that commentators have opinions everyone does. The problem starts when those opinions aren't built on a foundation of verifiable facts, when they're, like Harry Mahari said, unmoored from reality.
And that lack of grounding, that's where we slam right into the next big problem our sources highlight, this widespread issue of actual misinformation and just pure sensationalism.
Yeah, the news articles we looked at give us pretty concrete evidence of this. They point out that lots of Nepali language channels on YouTube, they present themselves like they're news media.
Right, using names that sound official.
Exactly. But the key thing is they're not listed or recognized by the Press Council Nepal.
Ah, so they lack that formal status, which means...
That means they aren't necessarily following journalistic codes. They aren't being monitored in the same way as registered media. There's less accountability.
And the impact of that lack of accountability is, well, the spread of outright fake news, affecting real people.
We see this so vividly in the story about Saraswati Katka. She's a young Nepali woman working over in Dubai.
Okay. What happened to her?
She saw a video on a channel called Trishuli Kabar TV. It claimed the president's motorcade had been involved in some incident and someone had died.
Oh, wow. That's serious.
Yeah, and she believed it. Understandably totally distressed by this news. Only to find out later, by checking with friends back home, realizing no traditional media was reporting it, that it just never happened.
It was completely fabricated.
Completely fabricated. And that one false video, the article says, got over 6,000 views.
6,000 views, spreading unnecessary panic and distress based on a lie. That's awful.
And apparently, Trishuli Kabar TV wasn't just a one-off mistake. The same channel also spread fake news about the Prime Minister, Prachanda.
What did they claim that time?
Claimed he had to flee his residence by helicopter because of massive protests. Again, totally dramatic, totally untrue, designed for maximum impact.
And how many views did that one get?
That video reportedly got 21,000 views before it was eventually taken down.
Eventually, after 21,000 people potentially saw it.
Right. And there's another channel mentioned, Nepali Kabar TV, also flagged for putting out false info, like claiming a candidate had dropped out of the presidential race.
Again, that's political misinformation that could really sway people's understanding of important events.
Exactly. These stories get traction because they're designed to be sensational. They use these headlines and thumbnails that are often way over the top, misleading, or just plain false, crafted purely to get clicks.
It's the digital version of yelling fire in a crowded theater, isn't it? Just for attention and clicks.
Totally. And it's not just us saying this is bad practice. Our sources mention YouTube's own policies on thumbnails, and it's pretty clear these channels are just blatantly violating them.
Right. YouTube has rules against this stuff, supposedly. What do the policies actually forbid in thumbnails?
Well, they're restricted if they violate community guidelines. That includes obvious stuff like graphic content, hate speech, copyrighted material, but also critically misleading or fake information.
Okay, so it's explicitly against the rules. And does the policy define misleading?
It does. It includes using the thumbnail as clickbait, using sensationalized text or imagery, making false promises about what's in the video, or using misleading editing, like fake expressions on people's faces or screenshots taken totally out of context, all designed to trick you into clicking.
Yeah. When you think about those fake news examples, the president's carcade, the PM fleeing, you can easily imagine exactly those kinds of hyped up, misleading headlines and dramatic, maybe even faked thumbnails being used.
Direct violations of the platform's own stated rules.
And this push towards sensationalism over actual substance, it's backed up by some academic research cited in the sources from an IA4 conference abstract.
Right, IA4, the academic forum. What did that research find about these viral stories in Nepal?
The study looked at viral YouTube stories and found they relied heavily on negative emotions to hook viewers.
Negative emotions, like what?
Like words linked to extreme anger, cruelty, heartlessness, a lack of mercy or compassion. Those were really common.
Wow. So intentionally tapping into really strong negative feelings to make the content spread.
Seems like it. It's not just reporting facts, it's framing everything in this intense negative way to get a reaction.
Yeah, that's grim.
And the study found substantial misrepresentation and blatant violation of ethical principles, particularly when these channels covered cases involving vulnerable and gullible people.
Oh, that's deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
Exploiting sensitive personal situations or vulnerabilities just to go viral.
Yeah. And the study links this directly to the viral going culture. It says unsubstantiated contents flow along with this drive to go viral, and that poses threats to journalistic values.
So if going viral is the main goal, then accuracy, fairness, ethics, they all take a back seat.
Pretty much. Which brings us right to the engine driving a lot of this. The money, the economic incentive.
Oh, right. YouTube's model. They pay creators based on ads, yeah.
Essentially, yes. The more views, the more potential ad revenue.
Are there thresholds to even start earning?
Yeah, you need to hit certain numbers. 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 valid public watch hours in the last year. Once you're in the YouTube Partner Program, that ad revenue becomes a direct motivator.
And the potential earnings, they could be enough to make this seem like a pretty good business for some people.
According to the sources, yeah. Creators could potentially make somewhere between 5,000 to 12,000 Nepali rupees a month for every 100,000 views, especially if the video gets international reach.
Okay, so that's a clear financial reward tied directly to getting eyeballs on the content.
Exactly. And as one article puts it, this revenue model basically encourages creators to post sensational and clickbait content to attract more views.
Because that's what goes viral.
Right. Sensational stuff, tapping into those negative emotions, using misleading headlines, that's often what gets the huge view counts needed for decent earnings. It creates this financial structure that actually rewards virality and engagement, even if the content itself is inaccurate or harmful.
So the system itself kind of fuels the problem, and it's especially good at reaching certain audiences.
Exactly. The lawyer, Rastra Bimoshan Timosena, he points out that this misleading content is really effective at reaching Nepalists living abroad.
Why them specifically?
Because they might rely heavily on YouTube for news from home, and they might lack that immediate local context or easy access to fact-checkers back in Nepal. They become a particularly susceptible audience.
Timosena believes money is the main motive here, but he does add a caveat.
Yeah, he's careful to say that misuse of the platform may be guided by other motives as well.
Which is important. It's not just about cash. What else could be driving it?
Could be anything, really. Pushing a specific political agenda, settling personal scores, just chasing fame, or maybe even just enjoying the feeling of power that comes with having a big online audience.
And the sources give us a specific example. It hints at these other motives, don't they? With Nepali TV.
Yes. The article notes the likely owner, Janak Nishal Busel. He seems to run it through his personal accounts, doesn't claim to be a journalist. But, crucially, he's reportedly the vice president of an organization linked to the Rastriya Janamorcha party.
The left-leaning political party. Okay, that's significant.
Highly significant. It suggests the content might not be purely for ad money, but also to push that party's views or interests. Maybe using the channel to spread propaganda or attack opponents, all disguised as news.
It just underlines how complex the motivations can be behind this online commentary. It's not always straightforward.
Definitely not. And the consequences of this whole mix, the incentives, the different motives, the practices, they're severe. Tamal Santa points out, once misinformation gets widely accepted, it's incredibly hard to correct.
Yeah, the fake story takes root.
Right. And any later fact checks often just don't reach the same people, or they don't have the same impact. The damage is already done.
So, okay. We have this challenge. Unregulated, often sensational, misinformative content driven by money and maybe politics. What are the formal responses? How are the regulators trying to deal with this?
Well, in Nepal, the main media regulator is the Press Council Nepal, the PCN. Our sources talk about what they're doing. They get complaints from the public about YouTube channels spreading fake news or pretending to be news outlets.
And they do their own monitoring, too.
Yeah, they actively monitor social media and YouTube channels, keeping tabs on content, even from channels that aren't officially registered with them.
And if they find violations,
they can escalate it. Often, they forward their findings and complaints to the Nepal Police's Cyber Bureau for investigation and potential action under existing laws.
Okay. Have they taken any specific steps? Because this problem seems to be growing.
Yes. They formed a dedicated task force specifically to look at regulating YouTube and social media. One article mentioned this task force was monitoring 35 YouTube channels they suspected of breaking journalistic codes, and they were recommending prosecution to the Cyber Bureau if laws were broken.
Do we have a sense of how much action they're taking?
That same article gives some numbers. It reported action against 31 YouTubers, which could be individuals or companies, in just a recent 15-day period, and 43 in the whole previous fiscal year.
Okay, so they are actively pursuing cases. What kind of action can they actually take? Does it depend on the channel?
It does. For channels that are registered with the PCN, even if they're mainly online, the PCN can issue direct orders.
Like what kind of orders?
Things like telling them to edit or remove violating content, suspend stuff deemed unfavorable, provide clarification for their reporting within 24 hours, or immediately take down obscene content. These are direct instructions because the PCN has authority over registered media. Examples mentioned were Hello TV, Nepal's Facebook page, PNP Media, Narek Petra YouTube channel.
Okay, but what about all those channels that aren't registered, the ones just operating online without that formal media status?
Right. For those unregistered channels, especially if they're spreading misleading, indecent, or obscene stuff, using crazy headlines to incite violence or rumors, and crucially, posing as media when they aren't, the PCN's approach is different.
Because they don't have direct authority.
Exactly. So they send letters to the Cyber Bureau recommending investigation and action under relevant laws like cybercrime laws. One article said they'd referred 28 such channels to the Bureau.
Okay, so the PCN is trying to work within its mandate, using directives for registered media and coordinating with police for the unregistered ones.
And the PCN president, Balkrishna Basnet, he's quoted emphasizing they act impartially, regardless of affiliation. He stresses that baseless, one-sided, misleading content just can't be spread online. He mentions separate standards and guidelines exist for dealing with erring YouTubers and says the focus should be on promoting positive social media use.
Those separate standards and guidelines he mentions, that would primarily be the Journalist Code of Conduct, right? Our sources talk about that.
Exactly. That code is the foundation for ethical journalism in Nepal. And it explicitly says it applies to all types of media and journalists, including online media.
How does it define online media, though? Because that seems key.
Good question. It defines it as media established under the prevailing laws that accept the norms of journalism and editorial and distribute content online.
Established under prevailing laws and accept the norms of journalism. That's an important catch.
It is, because many of the problematic channels we've talked about probably wouldn't meet that definition. They aren't formally established as media. They don't accept journalistic norms, which highlights a regulatory challenge right there.
But let's look at what the code does say, because it seems to directly address the problems we've seen, like Section 4.6 on factual, balanced, and objective information.
Yeah, that section hits the misinformation issue head on. It demands factual news and balanced opinion, giving space to concerned parties. And it gets specific about online stuff. Social media posts by journalists should be true, factual, balanced, and decent. And crucially, check facts before reposting from other social networks.
That would stop that amplification of rumors we saw with the Saraswati Kadka story.
If followed, yes. Then there's Section 4.7, differentiating news, views, and advertisement.
Also super relevant to the sensationalism problem.
Totally. It demands a clear distinction. Ads must look like ads, news like news. It's meant to stop clickbaity, engagement-driven content from masquerading as objective reporting.
And what about fixing mistakes, since misinformation spreads so fast?
Section 4.14, readiness to rectify errors. It says media have to investigate questions about reliability, fix errors ASAP, and give space for refutations with evidence. That's the formal correction mechanism.
Assuming the outlet actually follows the code.
Right. The code also lists things journalists must not do. Many sound exactly like the harmful stuff we've discussed.
Like what?
Section 5.2, using information for discrimination and fulfillment of personal interests. It bans discrimination, creating hatred, but also forbids acting against journalism's professional decency for illegal money, personal gain, advantage, or to harm someone.
That directly targets using the platform for private gain or political hits, doesn't it? The money and power motives.
Exactly. And Section 5.3, incitement to violence, obscenity, terrorism, and crime.
Addressing the sensationalism and fear-mongering.
Yep. Bans inciting violence, terrorism, crime, suicide, or stuff that's vulgar against public decency or fear-inducing. That covers those emotionally charged, maybe scary narratives the academic study found.
What about exploiting vulnerable people?
Sections 5.4 and 5.5 cover that. Prohibiting causing more suffering to victim survivors, especially of sexual crime or discrimination. No disclosing identity without consent and careful thought. No dragging in irrelevant relatives to trash someone's reputation. Clear standards against exploiting tragedies for views.
And the misleading visuals, the thumbnails.
Covered too. Section 5.6 bans horrible visuals and photos, especially disturbing ones inciting violence or hatred. And 5, misuse of photo and visual, forbids distorting images or video to give a wrong impression unless you clearly state it's altered or modeled. Directly tackles fake thumbnails and misleading edits.
Is there anything about just deleting problematic content after posting?
Yeah, Section 5.8, post delete. Says online media shouldn't backdate posts, and generally stuff uploaded shouldn't just be deleted. If it is, maybe because it was a serious mistake, an apology is needed. And interestingly, it makes the media outlet responsible for comments on their platform.
Oh, okay. Accountability for the discussion, too.
And finally, Section 5.9, improper pressure and relations.
Ensuring independence.
Right. No influence from advertisers, sources, special interests. No sponsor-influenced news. Avoid improper ties. Directly counters both financial and political agendas, potentially dictating the content.
Okay, so the Journalist Code of Conduct is actually pretty thorough on paper. It outlines standards that should govern online media, hitting accuracy, fairness, avoiding sensationalism, protecting people, independence. How are violations handled?
Sections 6 and 7 outline the process. Usually, complain to the media outlet first. If that doesn't work, file a written complaint to the PCN within 35 days.
And the PCN investigates.
Yes, they investigate. They can order the outlet to publish a correction or apology. For violations, Section 7 lists actions, recommending suspension of press passes, blacklisting, recommending action by government or journalist groups, and significantly for online media, recommending the authorities block the content for a specific time.
Ah, so the code does provide a mechanism for regulators to request content blocking for online media breaking the rules.
It sets up a formal pathway, yes. But despite this code, despite the PCN's efforts, our sources also point out some pretty big critiques and gaps in how this whole system works for the current online world.
What are those limitations?
Well, that lawyer again, Rastra Bimakan Temalsana, he makes a key point. The Press Council, as it's currently set up, might just not be the appropriate institution to handle the sheer volume and speed of content from daily YouTube commentators. He suggests Nepal needs something stronger, maybe a new council built for the digital age.
That makes sense. A body designed for newspapers might struggle with the pace and tech of YouTube.
Exactly. And Timal Sena highlights a major legal gap. YouTube news in Nepal isn't really regulated by the government because it's not clearly defined under the law.
Unlike India, apparently.
Right. India has specific digital news regulations. Without that clear legal definition in Nepal, a lot of this online commentary falls outside traditional media law. It makes it harder to apply things like the journalist code directly to many YouTubers.
So even with the PCN trying to bring in the Cyber Bureau, there's this basic problem of legal classification for these online news channels.
Precisely. And making it even harder, critics point to YouTube's failure to monitor Nepali language content effectively.
Meaning, even if YouTube has global policies,
If their moderation systems, their algorithms, their human reviewers aren't properly equipped to understand and review Nepali content at scale, then their own rules don't get enforced well enough. It leaves the door wide open for abuse.
okay, so we have the problem, the local attempts to regulate it, and the limitations of those attempts.
Yeah.
What about the platform itself? What's YouTube doing globally, and how might that affect things in Nepal?
Well, YouTube, being this global giant, says it's investing heavily to fight misinformation. They talk about policies, products to connect users with authoritative content, removing harmful videos. They quote a figure, over 121,000 removed globally in Q3 2022 for misinformation.
Okay.
They also mention funding fact-checkers, like a big $13.2 million grant to the International Fact-Checking Network.
So they're presenting themselves as actively working on this problem globally,
Right.
promoting good info, taking down bad stuff.
That's the public stance.
Yeah.
But this is where one of our sources, that India Today article, introduces a really interesting and maybe concerning twist.
Yeah.
It suggests there might be a pretty fundamental shift happening inside YouTube in how they approach content moderation, reportedly since around December 2024.
A shift. How so?
The report suggests YouTube has kind of quietly changed its strategy, reportedly prioritizing freedom of speech first, particularly for political and social topics.
Freedom of speech first. That sounds like a potential change in balance compared to just removing harmful stuff. What does it mean practically, according to the report?
The big reported change is the threshold for taking content down. Apparently, before, maybe if just say 25% of a video broke the rules, it could be removed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the report claims a video might stay up even if half of it violates the rules if it's considered in the public interest.
And public interest covers things like politics, social issues, current events.
That seems to be the context, yeah. And the examples the India Today article gives are pretty striking. They really illustrate what this could mean.
Give us the examples.
Okay, one was a video falsely claiming COVID vaccines change your DNA, which is, scientifically wrong, potentially harmful misinformation.
Right. Clear violation, you'd think.
But according to the report, the video was not removed. Why? Because it also had other stuff in it, news clips, political opinions, and crucially, it didn't directly tell people not to get vaccinated.
Wow. So the presence of other, maybe legitimate content allowed the core misinformation to stay
Yeah.
because it was part of a public interest discussion.
That's the implication. It suggests misinformation might get a pass if it's wrapped up in broader commentary.
That is alarming. What was the other example?
It involved a video using a transphobic slur, language that would normally be a clear hate speech violation.
Okay.
That video was also reportedly left online. The reason given: it happened during a longer discussion about government hearings. So again, the context of the broader public interest topic seemed to override the specific rule-breaking language.
So the context of political or social debate could now act as a kind of shield for content that actually violates YouTube's own rules.
That's what the report strongly suggests. And it frames this as happening while other platforms are also maybe easing up on moderation, partly due to pressure about censorship claims.
And YouTube hasn't shouted this from the rooftops.
The report says no big public announcement, more like an internal policy enforcement update. Their stated goal, according to the report, is finding that tricky balance between reducing harm and protecting free expression. They still say they'll remove stuff causing serious harm, but want to make room for previously blocked conversations.
But what do the critics say about this potential downside?
The critics cited in that article are worried. They think this change could just lead to more hate speech, more false information spreading, and they question the motives. Maybe it's partly about saving money on expensive moderation. Maybe it's about driving engagement, because controversial stuff often gets more clicks.
This reported shift, if it's accurate, feels like it could have huge implications, especially when you bring it back to Nepal.
Absolutely. Think about the problems we just discussed.
Right.
The lack of effective Nepali language moderation, the reliance on users reporting things, mass reporting was mentioned.
Right.
Now, if YouTube's global policy shifts towards freedom of speech first, tolerating rule-breaking content if it's framed as public interest, and their specific language moderation is already weak, well, that could disproportionately harm the information environment in places like Nepal, couldn't it?
It suggests the very problems local regulators and users are fighting misinformation, hate speech, tucked into political talk, might actually become more common, or at least harder to get taken down, regardless of local laws or codes, if the platform itself is becoming more permissive.
Precisely. Even though YouTube does provide ways for users to report things, you can report videos, channels, thumbnails, comments, ads, the Google Help source details, all that.
The actual effectiveness of reporting hinges completely on YouTube's review process and the policies they apply.
Exactly. And if those policies are getting looser towards content with misinformation or dodgy language, as long as it's wrapped in political chat, then the reporting tools become less powerful for users in places like Nepal trying to clean things up.
It creates this real disconnect, doesn't it, between local needs and global platform policies, potentially undermining efforts to tackle misinformation right at the source.
It really complicates things.
Okay, so let's try and weave all these threads together now. Bring it back to you, the listener, trying to navigate this online world every single day. All these issues we've unpacked: how users see bias, the real examples of fake news and hype, the money driving it, the struggles and gaps in regulation, and these complex, maybe shifting platform policies. These aren't just abstract ideas.
No, they directly shape the information you see, the stuff you consume, maybe the stuff you end up believing online.
So given this whole picture, where some creators are pushed towards clicks over facts, where lots of channels operate outside journalistic standards, where the legal regulation is murky, and where the platforms themselves might be changing their approach, just relying on any single online source without really thinking critically about it, it feels fundamentally risky.
Yeah, critical thinking isn't just like a nice skill to have in this environment. It's basic survival gear for staying informed without getting led astray. You really have to be your own filter, your own fact checker.
Think back to that Reddit discussion we started with. When you come across online commentary, especially on YouTube, maybe ask yourself, what could be motivating this creator? Is it mainly views and money? Are they pushing a political line? Or do they seem genuinely focused on informing?
And do they back up what they say? Do they use credible sources? Or does it feel more like that unmoored from reality stuff?
Look closely to how it's packaged, too. The headlines, the thumbnails, do they feel sensational? Designed to just provoke a big emotional reaction instead of thought? Does it scream clickbait?
And the content itself, does it feel balanced or is it super one-sided? Does it engage fairly with other views or facts that might contradict it? Does it feel like it's maybe exploiting sensitive situations or vulnerable people just for emotional impact?
Understanding all these forces, the creator's choices, the platform's business model, the regulatory gaps, the platform's own shifting policies. It just gives you the tools to ask these critical questions, to make better judgments about whether you can trust the information you're seeing.
So just to quickly recap this whole deep dive, we started with how users themselves struggle with bias online. We saw concrete examples of fake news and sensationalism, often driven by money or maybe politics. We looked at the efforts of regulators like the Press Council Nepal, the standards in the Journalist Code, but also the real challenges and gaps in applying them online. And finally, we explored YouTube's role, its global efforts, but also these worrying reports about potential shifts in how they moderate content.
And the key takeaway from all of it seems really clear. In this age of information overload, where so much is unreliable, the responsibility to actively figure out what's true, spot the bias, resist the hype, it falls more and more on you, the consumer.
Yeah. Navigating this landscape means understanding this complex mix of individual motives, flawed incentives, regulatory limits, and the often opaque policies of the platforms. It just requires constant vigilance, constant critical thinking about everything you see online.
Which leaves us with, I guess, this final thought to chew on. If this digital world is increasingly one where the lines are blurred between real news, opinion, entertainment, outright lies, and maybe those lines are becoming even more permissible on the platforms, How resilient can any of us really be against being misinformed or manipulated? What's your actual personal strategy for cutting through all that noise and staying genuinely informed in this crazy, constantly changing online world?